You could also do this for arrays, right? When let's say you're finding the first number with some property, a first item with some property in an array. It doesn't have to be a list of numbers. Um, so we're just going to give as an example we're looking for the first positive in the list. So if we're looking for the first positive in the list here, um, what we would really want to do is we'd want to think about the positions of the numbers in the array, right? So the positions are going to start at 0 here, and they're going to go all the way up to the length of the array minus 1. So again, range ends 1 before whatever integer we give it. So if the last index is at the array.length minus 1, we would add 1 to that to stop at arr.length, right? Arr is standing for the array that's inputted. And here if we're going to use range, we don't have to use range. We could actually go through the array itself, but I'm just going to use range because it tends to be convenient for some other problems. Um, but if you're just going and using range here, you can't actually go and generate the numbers that you have in the array or the items that I mean, certainly not if it's strings, but even if it's numbers, if these numbers are not consecutive or contiguous, right? Just having like, -5, -4, -3, you can't use range to get the actual items in the array itself. So instead, we're using range to get the positions of the items, right? So again, that's just what I said. You go 0 if you want to start at the beginning of the list, all the way up to array.length minus 1 if you want to go to the end. And remember, range stops 1 before, so we go to arr.length. Right? So this time, this will be true for any time we want to go through an array. And here we want the first positive. And I changed my variable here to represent the fact that we're actually talking about the positions of the items in the array rather than the actual items themselves, right? So if you give this array to first positive here, right? So ARR is equal to this array, then ARR.length is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So this is going to generate the array 0 to 6, right? Because it stops 1 before. So again, the first number it's going to plug in is 0, then 1, then 2, right? So these are the indices. That's why I called it the index. Now when I'm actually checking what's greater than 0, I don't want to check the indices themselves, right? Because then right away I know, well, 0 won't be greater than 0, but 1 will be greater than 0. And so regardless of what array I use, this thing is always going to give me back 1, which will be stored in first index of positive. So I don't want to actually check the index itself. Instead, I want to check the item that's at that index, right? So ARR is representing my array. That's going to -5, -2, 0, 7, -8, -10, 10 is going to be substituted for that. So if I substitute this and I actually put brackets and 0 or brackets and 1 or brackets and 2, that's going to get me the 0th item or the first item or the second item of this array. And that's what I want to check if it's greater than 0, right? So that's why we use ARR index greater than 0. So you could see it goes and it checks first ARR of 0, it's the -5, -5 is not greater than 0. So then it goes to the next one in the range array, the array generated by range, so it checks 1. So it substitutes 1 for index and it checks is ARR1, which is -2, is that greater than 0? And it's not. And then it checks the next one, which is 2. So ARR2 greater than 0, well, ARR2 is just 0. 0 is not greater than 0. And then finally comes up with 3, and ARR3 is 7, and 7 is greater than 0 is true. So this is where it stops, but it doesn't give you the 7, right? It gives you the item from the array here that was generated by range. So it's giving you the 3. So if you want, and this is then what's going to be stored in first index of positive. So if you want the actual item that's at index 3, you're just going to replace first index of positive with 3 here, and do ARR of that to get the 7, right? So I was telling you how this is going to work, but again, how you would think about this to figure out, oh, I would need ARR of first index of positive, is the fact that first index of positive is going to be the number 3. If you trace the code, 3 is the last index that goes in where you get true. And you say, well, I don't want the 3, I want the thing that's the number that's located at position 3. So that cues you in and says, okay, well, in order to get the item that's at position 3, I need to put the name of the array first with square braces around it. Right, so that's why we used the ARR of brackets of first index of positive. If you just wanted first index of positive, if you just wanted the index, you could remove that, right? One thing I also want to bring out is that you're not using index, right? Index is only available here, right? So from here to here. It's an input to this function. But outside of this function, index won't be defined. So if you put index here, you would get an error, right? First index of positive would be what you wanted here. It's the 3. Right? So you could also do this with strings. As an example, let's say you wanted to find the index of the first space beyond a starting index, right? So again, what you could do here is, since you don't want to, you're still going through the positions of you're still going through the positions of the characters, or the indices of the characters in your string S. And you could actually do that the same, you can access the characters of a string the same way you can access the items of an array. So you could use S of index just like you were able to use ARR of index. And when you use S of index, if S is a string, it's going to refer to the character that's at that index. So you could have also done s.char index, right? And since we want the first one that's going to be equal to, the first one that's a space, we check in our condition here, or the output from this function, we check if S of index is equals a space, right? So you could see here that the range this time, though, we're starting with start index instead of 0, because we don't want to start at the beginning of the string. We want to look for the first space from start index. But we still are going to the end of the string, which should be s.length. Maybe at some point I will put some annotations to go over all of these typos. But anyway, for now, just pretend that ARR said S. So in this case, it would be the number of characters in the string, just like before it would be the number of items in the array. Right? So again, tracing through the code here, if we do console.log first space of kya tum Hindi bolte ho, right? So that's Hindi for do you speak Hindi? And hopefully I pronounced it right for anyone who does speak Hindi. But anyway, we're trying to get the first space starting at index 5. And so this string here is going to be replaced with S, and the 5 is going to be substituted in for the start index. And so what's the first thing it's going to check? Well, you're going to get range from 5 to the length of the string. So it's going to start by checking if S of 5, right? 5 gets plugged in for index, so it's going to check if S of 5 is equal to the space. So S of 5, you could see the character at position 5 is T. And T is not equal to a space, so that's false. So then it goes to the next one, right? So range 5 to the array.length, it's going to generate the array 5, 6, 7, etc. So the next one it'll check is 6, and so it'll ask is s of 6 equal to the space, and s of 6 is u. Remember, s is the string here. Kya tum hindi bolte ho? So that's false again. And then it's going to check the m, because that's at position 7, and it's going to ask if the m is a space, which it's not. So it then goes on to position 8, and now the thing that's at position 8, the character at position 8, is a space, so it's going to check that space is equal space. It's going to get true, and 8 is going to be the number that you get back from this. So 8 will be stored in first index of space, and that will then be returned. And again, here I just wanted to bring out that I didn't do s of first index of space. And why? What would that actually be? What would s of first index of space be? Well, first index of space would be the 8. So if you did s of that, you're saying the character at position 8 of the string, which would be a space, right? Which would not be a surprise at all, because that's going to be, this thing has to be true for this to stop, right? Either it has to be true, or if there are no spaces, this is just going to be undefined. But assuming there's at least one space, we're going to stop only when s of index is the space. So first index of space is going to be an index of a space, and if you do s of that index, you're just going to get back a space. So obviously here that wouldn't be useful information. We want to get the first index of the space. We know there's going to be a space there, so we just return first index of space without the s. Okay, so